Hi, my name is Jeff Pagano, and welcome to the Harpin on Rugby podcast. Joining me this week is someone making his 14th pod appearance. Now, last week we had our reigning Harpin Super Blue League champion, Tom Coleman, on, and I was going to introduce this week's guest as the guy who finished last, but he has already put that behind him, and he actually finished round one of the URC top of our leaderboard, so at least one Leinster fan took something positive from the weekend. Welcome back to Mr. David Cordial.
Happy to be here, Jeff.
Indeed,
If
great to
if
have you.
only if only I'd predicted how this week had gone, it would have been a perfect sweep for me. But I had too much
Exactly.
faith in the boys in blue, and
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, all of us except Tom actually were the same on that score. But anyway, listen, there's no putting it off any longer. Let's turn our attention to Leinster's exploits down in Cape Town. Now, here's a generic 80-word summary of the match. In a dominant performance, the Stormers defeated Leinster 35-0 in the BKT United Rugby Championship. Early penalties from Jury Mate set the tone, with Leinster struggling to maintain possession. Despite some promising plays, Leinster failed to score. The Stormers capitalized on their chances with tries from Stefan Ungerer and Ruan Ackerman, along with a bonus point try from Mate. Leinster's discipline faltered, leading to yellow cards and a lack of scoring opportunities, sealing their defeat at the DHL Stadium. Now, that pretty much says it all, but obviously we need to harp on what went wrong for Leinster. And I reckon the best place to start is the nil part of that final score. A very rare occurrence for us. Apparently, the last time it happened was way back in 2008. Now, last season, Leinster were joint top point scorers along with the Bulls, averaging over 30 points per game. So, what happened against the Stormers, Dave?
nothing. That's what happened. Nothing happened against the Stormers. It was a really bizarre setup. I think along with yourself went to the Leinster preseason game in Tallaght Stadium. Well supported despite the result on the day where they lined out against Cardiff. Now managed two scores on that day, but the thing that I came away from that game feeling was I wasn't really sure what Leinster were trying to do in attack. There didn't seem to really be a plan. Go through a few phases and kick the ball if you don't make distance, which isn't terrible, but it just never seemed to materialize to anything. The two tries that came on that day were the result of a lucky dink from a Harry Byrne, and then like a try down the other end. There wasn't really much to them that you could really hang your hat on. And I kind of wrote it off at the time and said, well, okay, that's a preseason game. It's a very switched up team. 15 different players on in each half. You can park it and move on. Today, that wasn't the case. We had Sam Prendergast, the Ireland number 10. We had Luke McGrath, a man who has multiple test caps. Kieran Frawley and Robbie Henshaw in the centres. The O'Briens, along with Jordan Larmour in the back line. Like that is a really solid back line. And they just didn't seem to have any plan. I will talk about the set piece a little bit later. That wasn't going well for Leinster, and anytime that happens, you just don't really have a platform to launch much off of. That can make it hard because so many teams build so much around set piece attacks. Failing that, we go to box kicking or kicking long. Now we had Sam Prendergast on the pitch. If there was any silver lining in this game, and it really was hard to think that there was a silver lining in this game, it was Prendergast's kick from hand. They were really good. He was able to find 50-22s. He found a 50-22 in the first 5 minutes of the match where he landed the ball between two players who were tracking back. It wasn't even the space wasn't marked. He just still found the grass. So he was able to do that. And he was putting bombs up. McGrath was putting box kicks up. Box kicking has never been his super strength, but he's not bad at it either. And it just seemed like every time that we did put the ball in the air, if it was a 50-50, it went the Stormers' way. Either we knocked it on or they knocked it back or they caught it cleanly, but it never seemed to land Leinster's way. So in the absence of having a functioning platform to launch off of and then any kind of momentum to build from in terms of um, kicks through, there was just no platform. There was nothing to launch off of. And this might be the one thing we can kind of see coming in terms of the lineup. Like I said, it was a very experienced backline, but it was a young enough pack. You had Gus McCarthy and Jack Boyle, both now I think Ireland internationals, but still very young men. Ravis Slimani, obviously at the under end of the scale, 50 cap French international, but a much older man. Brian Deeney and Darren Mangan, very able operators for Leinster in the last season, but both also quite young players, quite inexperienced players in terms of some of the other members of the squad. And then even in the back row, look, Scott Penny has a lot of experience, so I can't really. He is young, but that's not really an excuse for him because he's been around for so long. Ryan Baird similarly is a 30 plus cap international. He should know better. James Culhan still quite young. So between Culhan, the second row, a couple of lads in the front row, they're all good players, but They're not seasoned internationals. So there can be allowances made there because when they were carrying, they weren't making ground. The Stormers were able to stop them dead at the gain line every time. One man tackles, two man tackles, stopping them dead or pushing them back. And it just meant that Leinster really never put them under enough pressure in open phase play to be able to create any kind of space to run into. There was one run of play in the first half where Jack Boyle forced a turnover just outside the Leinster 22. He makes a small break up. He's followed, he's supported. And that was really Leinster managed to string together a series of quick passes, offloads, and runs that led them up to outside the 22 before I think we knocked on and it resulted in the Stormers scrum. That was really the only proper attack we saw in the whole game. Other than that, there was nothing. It was, and we've watched the game back for our sins. We've now watched it twice on the rewatch, it's just hard to look at that game and go, what was the plan? Because if there was a plan and it had just been executed poorly, or if the Stormers were like a 2015 All Blacks team that were so dominant, we just couldn't get a look in. It might be easier to understand. And Leinster have lost in South Africa before. More often than not, we tend to lose in South Africa. I think some of our heaviest losses have been down there, but they've been much callower teams. And even in those matches, those teams haven't failed to score at all. As you said, like go back to 2008. That's the last time this has happened. That's how rare it is. Big hay was made of the fact that in the Champions Cup knockouts last year, Leinster managed to nil two teams back to back because it's a really odd thing to have happen in an 80-minute game for you not to get anything. And it's not something that was ever going to happen, but there was a very small part of me that in that last run of play when Leinster had penalty advantage and got a penalty and went to the corner and ended up getting turned off, I was like, you could have just given it to Harry Byrne and said, we're not going in with a zero on the sheet, just put it over the bar, please, for the love of God, just put it over the bar. There wasn't even pride to play for at that stage, just for the sake of not being nilled. It almost would have been worth it. I think obviously if you'd been in earlier in the game, we might well have gone for it. But a lot is made of the fact that Jacques Nienaber, as the head coach, is a man much more focused on defence. There's been concerns from some Leinster supporters that Leinster will become a much more defensively focused team, and certainly in the last season, I think I'd spoken on this pod before that one of the big differences between the last season and the season before, we scored about the same number of points, but we conceded about half the number of points. That's great. That's what you want. Defense wins championships. Defense wins finals, and we won it. We won a trophy last season. But Jack Nienaber is not the only coach. Tyler Blainaldale is in there, and all of these players, we don't have the lines back yet, but these are Ireland internationals. These are, we've got a French international. There's no excuse for this lack of anything. And I think next week against the Bulls is going to be a tough game, but we'd want to see something because they're really between the last two games that I've now seen Leinster play in the last few weeks. It's really hard to know from an offensive point of view what the plan is, because it's not even a badly executed plan. It's just the lack of one.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need a strategy to be able to create uh, uh, time in the 22 yourself. You don't want to rely on the other team making mistakes, and that seemed to be what we were trying to do. I mean, even as good as Sam Prendergast's kicking game was, they're not all going to be 50-22s, and some of them went to touch outside the 22, some of them went in. You're relying on the Stormers to screw up and for that, and that's not a great strategy if that's really all you have. Like you say, when it came to it's those midfield phases that I think that makes the difference. How are you going to stretch the defense and find the space and it just advance the ball towards their 22, and that's what you need to be able to do, and we weren't able to do that. The Stormers were getting in over the ball. You're up against any South African back row. You give them half a sniff, they're over the ball, and they're gonna jack you into oblivion, and
Yeah, and
that's what was happening.
that definitely hit a lot in that first half as well. I took a note that between the 6th minute and the 24th minute, which is not a big span of time, there were six penalties conceded, and they were all Leinster penalties. Like that's the
Mhm.
thing as well. Like you can't build off of that. Like that you're going backwards constantly, and that's it.
No.
Like attack and defense. I think I looked up the stats. It was pretty even split between the two. If you can't keep hold of the ball when you're in attack, and then also in defense, you lose the ball in attack, that's bad. You lose the ball in defense, that's like you were already defending. Now go defend 25, 30 meters back from where you are now right now. It's just you can't build forward momentum with that kind of with those that kind of penalty count.
Absolutely. And I mean, another thing I noticed was from literally from start to finish, whenever it's not even about attack strategy, whenever there was anything like a 50-50 ball. So in other words, maybe a pass went to ground from either side and it went up, or there was a high ball and someone got their hand to it, but they sort of randomly batted it back. Whenever there was those contestables, they 90% of the time ended up in the Stormers' hands.